I just attempted to complete the GMTK Game Jam in under 4 hours, and I failed. What's up, gamers? Like I mentioned, the GMTK Game Jam just started, and I gave myself a 4-hour window to complete it. But before I talk about the 4-hour slot, let's talk about the theme of the Game Jam, because as you probably know, Game Jams give you a theme that you have to make a game based on. And the theme for the GMTK Game Jam 2024 is Built to Scale. Now, in the announcement video, he talked about like planets and things getting bigger and smaller, but when I hear the term built to scale, I immediately go into software development and game development, because I worked at Amazon for 4 years and then 343 on Halo. That's a term that gets thrown around a lot, right? So I immediately start thinking of building games correctly. Right. So what would be a game about making games incorrectly? So I immediately start thinking like, oh, gameplay around, you have to fix mistakes that happen during the game development process, or there are like bugs or something, right? Fixing the game so that it is, built to scale. I also start thinking about scaling, like what if some of the objects in the game are like the wrong size and the player has to like correct them. He needs to make sure they're like scaled correctly. And that brought to mind an indie game I played recently called 13F. I'll put a link to it in the description. It's a horror game where you start on like a floor of this building, and the very first floor, the 13th floor, is normal. Everything is as it's supposed to be. As you continue descending through the office building, each floor has a chance to be like wrong. The door can be in the wrong spot, a light can be turned off that's supposed to be turned on, or scarier things can occur, like monsters and stuff, because it is a horror game. If there's something wrong, you need to immediately head back and go up. But if everything is fine, then you can go down. And your goal is to navigate all the way through the office building where you successfully determine if the floor is like correct or not. Those ideas combined in my head to a game where you go through these levels of a game, but not as like the person playing the game. You're like the construction worker building the game before it gets sent out, making sure everything in the game is built to scale, where you have like the model version, this is the way the game is supposed to be, and then you go through these levels, and if something's wrong, you report it, you're like, hey, this is a bad level, send it back, send it back to the factory, we need a new one. That's immediately what comes to mind for built to scale. And when you have a strong time constraint, there isn't too much time to really like go back and forth and be like, oh, is this a good idea? Maybe I could do this, maybe I could do that. You need to just like start building the game. And I have my 4-hour time constraint, so I just need to start building. You're probably wondering, why did you decide to do this jam in 4 hours? And honestly, it's just because I always like work myself to death. Whenever I do a game jam, I am completely destroyed afterwards. I barely sleep, and I'm like going, completely full focus, all of my mental effort on the game jam the entire time I'm working on it. And it's very unhealthy, it's very bad for me, and I burn myself out completely. And I've been trying to make a lot of good progress on my indie game, and I want to continue making my other YouTube videos, so I really felt like I couldn't afford to burn myself out. I needed to set myself a time constraint for this is how long you have to do the jam, just participate in it, have a good time, and then move on. And in my time zone, the game jam starts on August 16th at 10 a.m. and finishes at August 20th at 10 a.m. I think it's a 96-hour jam. If you look at the footage of me starting my project, you might notice that the clock in the corner is almost 6 a.m. on August 20th, which would mean that there's just about 4 hours until the jam ends. But that is entirely unrelated to why I decided to spend 4 hours on the jam. It has almost nothing to do with it, okay? It's not a coincidence, but it's unrelated, all right? You just gotta trust me on that. This was predetermined. This is something I wanted to do. It is not out of necessity. The Emperor's new clothes look really, really good. Just ignore that. I also mentioned the indie game I'm working on. To plug that before we jump into the game jam, it's called Isadora's Edge. It's available on Steam right now, so there'll be a link in the top comment. So if you want to click on it and wishlist it, it'd mean the world to me, but I don't want to spend too long on plugging my game before we get back to the game jam. So we have 4 hours to make this game. So quickly, I need to identify what are the parameters of the game gonna be and start tackling them like one at a time. So for this game, I'm thinking we should do 3 worlds. We have the main hub world. This is where you get to like submit your answer for if the level is bad. We have these 3 worlds that you can go to. You like take a portal into the world, and then it will either have changes and be like messed up, or have no changes and be like good to go. And there'll be 3 of those worlds. So you'll load onto the floor, and then you'll check those 3 worlds and count up how many mistakes they have, and then you report how many mistakes they have. So you go into the first world and there's like 2 changes. You go to the next world, there's 1 change. You go to the next world, there's no changes. So then you go press the button that says there are 3 changes, and you won that level. You go to the next floor. And if you get it wrong, you start back over, and your goal is to like win 10 in a row, right? That's what I'm thinking from the start. And so with that in mind, first we need a player that can move back and forth and jump into these portals to go between worlds. We need the hub world that has the portals in it. We need the 3 worlds that you can go into to find changes. And then we need the core gameplay loop. We need to be able to define things that can change in the world. So we set up the world and it's like in its base form. And then we need to put in like a node, like a difference node, where it's like, hey, this is what it's supposed to be. And then here are a few things it can change into. Then we need a like difference engine that can go through all of the potential differences, decide, hey, we want 2 in this world, 1 in this world, none in this world. And then it can pick from those difference options and say, let's turn this candle into a bigger candle. Let's make this enemy green. It goes through and decides all the changes to make, and then it needs to create some buttons. I decided on 3, where it creates 3 buttons, one of which is the correct answer. So that's the like difference engine. Then you need to be able to press the buttons to decide on your answer. Then you need to be able to go to the next floor, and it provides feedback on whether or not you were correct, and then it needs to load in the next floor. So those are like the 10 main components we need to make in these 4 hours. Not to mention we desperately need a tutorial. Otherwise the game is like completely non-understandable, since you would just be like, what is going on? There's worlds, there's buttons, it doesn't make any sense. So the game desperately needs a tutorial, and then you need like a title screen, and then you need music and sound effects. So we got like a list of these things that need to get done. I'm sure Editor Senpai has like put them all on the side for like easy following and understanding as a viewer. But with that in mind, it's 6 o'clock and it's time to get to work. So first we need to set up the project, set up the player, set up the camera, like the basic movement type stuff. And I had it in my head that the main character would be like a construction worker or an office worker. It's like some kind of person that isn't like the standard like player hero character. It is someone like doing their job to set up these worlds. So I went to went to game assets, typed worker, clicked the first one I found, which was like this construction worker here. You can see it on the screen probably. And it was like $5. So I just bought the asset and it immediately like started going with it. I think I spent less than a minute finding this game asset. So I pulled him into the game, got him set up the player controller, set up the camera, decided on the resolution. Doing all of that took me about 10 minutes. And honestly, it was pretty fast. So we got like the first item, the player character, boom, done. I spent the next 15 minutes picking out the environmental asset packs to use for the hub world, and then the 3 stages that you have to like find differences in. And we can show those like assets here. I picked this one for the hub world because it kind of feels like a video game construction facility type deal. And then we have the library, which reminded me of Castlevania's library. And then these plains, which obviously are like very Sonic-y plains. And then this icy cavern, which doesn't really specifically remind me of another game. I almost went with a Mega Man X environment, but I thought that it was a little bit too similar to like the video game construction environment, and this one was visually different enough. So the first 2 I picked because I thought, oh, hey, you have to fix these games before they go out. It'd be nice if they immediately make you think of other popular games. And then the last one is just for some visual differentiation. And also because I spent 15 minutes picking out these asset packs, which was way too much time to spend picking out these asset packs because we're very limited on the time we have. That's okay. We spent 15 minutes. We're down 25 minutes in total, and we're down 25 minutes, but we're on to the next task, which was to actually start using those asset packs to draw the major areas. I pulled in the asset pack I wanted to use for the main hub world, and annoyingly, it wasn't in the format I'm used to. I've been using the asset packs I usually download have like the auto tile set up, like pretty much ready to go. And maybe this one also has like a specific auto tiling thing ready for it, but it's not the one I'm familiar with. So with that in mind, I spent like 5 minutes like fiddling with the asset pack to get it imported, where normally it would be way faster to have it like ready to go. And you know, 5 minutes on a small thing like that where you basically don't really get much done doesn't sound like a lot, but in the case of 4 hours to make a game, 5 minutes is like 2% of your total time. So you can't really afford to waste that much time. But in any case, I got like the tile set in and I got it ready, and I started using that tile set to like decorate the main hub world. This took about 15 minutes to get it to a place where I was happy with, where I had little spots for the portals to go. I had a little section off to the side where I could put the buttons that you have to press. I left a slot for a door. I left some slot in the top where I could potentially put like player feedback or something like a bar or something. And I spent 15 minutes on it, which was like a little bit longer than you might want to. But for these kind of rapid projects and game jams in general, I often think to myself, oh, I'll go back and clean this up. This is kind of like a placeholder implementation for this detail. And then it stays in the game forever. I have experienced many times that whatever you decide on early on never gets changed. Especially on a time crunch, you just don't have the chance to go back and change anything. So I wanted it to be acceptable enough that I wouldn't feel the need to go back and change it without like wasting too much time on it. And maybe 15 minutes was already too much time to spend, but whatever. So we got the hub world like nice to move around in, and then it was time to get the portal set up. So I quickly found a portal asset. I think I spent a few minutes searching like animated pixel art portal, found one that I thought looked nice, pulled it in, set it up with like some proximity detection, made it so that it could detect your button press, and you could give it areas like here's where you should teleport to and link to another portal. And we got the portals working so that you can walk over it, press your button, you teleport to the next world, which I imported like the background tile and threw it back there so that I would know that I teleported to the right location. And you can see that it was working just fine. Getting this set up took about 15 more minutes, so we're down 1 hour, like 25% of the total time, but we got the player, we got the teleporters, we got the basic hub world stuff working. So we're in like a pretty good place. I wasn't having like too much doubt yet. I was like, maybe it's still possible. I hadn't yet reached the conclusion that this isn't going to happen. But the thing I was most worried about in trying to get this done was making the worlds, right? The individual stages. I was like, I don't know how long it's going to take me to use these tile set to set up the world and then put a bunch of stuff that can like change using like the difference engine system. So that needs to be the next step. I need to get the library like set up and ready to go. So I went into Aseprite actually and like moved the tiles around to get it into like the auto tiling format I was more familiar with, because I thought that would make me move a lot faster to be able to draw with the auto tiler than having to place tiles down like by hand. I'm probably right about that. I did mess it up. I had to go back and fix the auto tiling, but whatever. I got the auto tiling set up. I drew the floor. I put in the background. I didn't decorate it with too many of the things that I wanted to be in the final version because I figured I would decorate those using the like difference node thing I talked about, where I put like a bookshelf in, and then in the difference node, it knows that it can change it to be like a different color. It can make the bookshelf bigger. So I wanted to build the base stage that wouldn't change, and then I can put decorations on top of it that can change later. So I got that set up, and then I also needed to fix like the camera constraints and then add like physics collisions to the player so that I could like, you know, put boundaries around the level. And getting that all set up, you can watch me like teleport through the portal and go into the world, and you can see it set up. I can move back and forth. I can teleport back to the hub world. So it's all working great, and I got the basic world set up, but this took me an hour. So it is now 8. With 1 hour down, that's 2 of my 4 hours. It took a whole hour to set up this world. So at this point, I'm pretty convinced it's not happening. Maybe I can't finish this in 4 hours. I would have to zoom through the other stages or like reuse the library or something. I'm halfway done with my time, and I don't even have the core gameplay loop started yet. But if I think of it another way, I'm almost halfway done. So might as well just finish. And the thing I need to do is the core gameplay loop, which means I need to set up the difference nodes and the difference engine. So the difference nodes need to have a default version that is what appears in the stage if there isn't a change, and then it needs a list of options of ways it can change. And because the theme is built to scale, obviously one of the options on all of them should be to scale it up. But then you can also modulate it to change its color. I realized that it might not be a good idea to do this because it would need to be very drastic color changes so that colorblind people can play the game and not be at a huge disadvantage. But subtle color changes are not very fun because there's so much stuff you're trying to keep track of. So very drastic color changes ended up being what I did anyway, so it ended up, I think, not being a problem. But you can scale it, you can change the color, you can rotate it, flip it upside down, you can make it disappear, you can inflate certain pieces of it. So I had set up like a generic reusable difference node that I can drag into the stage and then fill it with a decoration and then a bunch of variations of that decoration. And it took about 20 minutes to get this like default generic difference node set up. And then I need to move on to the difference engine. Now the difference engine has a lot of responsibilities. It needs to go through all the differences in all the stages, set them up, and it needs to record how many differences it set up so that it knows the right answer. Then it needs to tell the buttons that you can press what the options are, knowing I'm gonna make the second button be the correct one, and then the first and third buttons need to be wrong, so I'm gonna give those these different options. When you press one of the buttons and you go through the door, it needs to like know, oh, hey, this guy got it right, so let's update the thing that says he got it right and he didn't make a mistake, or it needs to record that he made a mistake. So there's like a lot of things it needs to do. So I thought the first thing to do would be to set up the buttons. And I wanted the buttons to match the aesthetic of the hub world that I already set up. So I quickly jumped into Aseprite and started manipulating the tiles I had to build like a little button. And honestly, I think it turned out pretty cute. I think this is obviously like a little podium with a button on it. And then I built a little signpost that goes above it that has the text for the choice, and then the difference engine has access to all of these, and when it picks whatever the correct answer should be, it fills it in. I did the buttons first, so the pick the correct amount of choices and stuff is all stubbed out. It just always says, hey, there are like this many correct choices. I got it so that once it picks, right, once the stub is filled in, it'll be able to supply these buttons with the right choice. And getting the buttons basically set up took about 20 minutes, and then I needed to set up the door that you can go through to like load the next level. So I again jumped into Sprite and used some of the tiles and started manipulating those to get a door that you can go through. I gave it like a little animation of the door opening so that it's locked until you make a decision. That way there isn't like a you just go through the door without picking one of the options. That doesn't make any sense. So the door is like locked and you can't go through it until you pick one of the buttons. Once you press the button, the door opens, you can go through, go to the next stage, do it all again in gameplay loop, right? So I got the door set up and got it so that when you press a button, it opens. I got it doing all the stuff I just described, and that took about another 20, 30 minutes or so. So at this point, I got about an hour left. And this is the stage in a game jam where you start mentally cutting features to like quell the panic that you're not going to be able to finish, right? It's like the panic starts to bubble up and it's like, oh no, I don't have enough time. And it's like, oh, okay, the tutorial is just going to be like a text blurb in the description, so I have more time again. Oh, but no, it's taking too long, I'm not going to have more time. Oh, okay, everything's just going to be in the library. Oh, there's only going to be one stage. Oh, I don't have enough time. Oh, okay, actually, I'm just going to huddle up in a ball and cry because I don't have any more features to cut, right? Eventually, that's where you get, you know? And well, I think like at 2 hours and I had already cut all the music and sound effects, so that's not even on the table anymore. So we got about an hour left and I need to do all of the difference node, like pick how many choices there should be, propagate it, all that stuff. So I start building out that functionality. I started to serialize the difference nodes into the difference engine by hand before realizing that that was a terrible idea. And instead I built difference node holders that when the game started will look at all of the children that they have and supply those to the difference engine. So that saved me a bunch of time making that realization before I got too late in it. Set up some test difference nodes and got them sent up to the difference engine, got it running its little algorithm to decide how many differences it should make. It makes those decisions, it propagates them, it sends out the difference node, it updates it. I ran into several problems while I was trying to get this working, and it ended up taking about a half hour before it was like good enough for me to move on to the next step. And so now I have 30 minutes left. And at this point, I don't even know if I'm going to be able to finish the core gameplay loop, let alone have anything even remotely playable to like finish. Only 30 minutes left, might as well see how far I can get, right? And I realize I don't have the system for supplying the player with their feedback at all. And it's really important in this game to know whether you got it right or not. If the game just like you pick and you're like, well, I hope that was correct. I could make it so that if you ever get it wrong, you go right back to the start. Instead of having like a scoreboard, you have like which floor you're on. So if you get it right, you go to floor 2. If you get that right, you go to floor 3. And if you get it wrong, you're back on floor 0, right? The model floor. Oh, yeah, that's something I did here too. So I realized that the player doesn't have any feedback on whether they got it right or wrong. And also the game loads and just starts propagating those differences right away, right? So there is no chance for the player to learn what the rooms are supposed to look like. So I set it up so that the first level is like the model floor, the thing that you're building to scale, right? This is the model, then these are the rooms that are built to that model. So the very first one, it always propagates 0 differences, and the door is open from the start, and pressing the buttons doesn't do anything. And so then you go through that door, and then you start the gameplay loop, right? So the first level is the model floor, so that you get a chance to learn the stages. So I set up the model floor, got that working as a part of the gameplay loop, and then I needed to provide the player feedback, because I could have it so that if you ever got it wrong, you just go right back to the model floor so that you know you got it wrong, if that is the feedback. So you have the model floor, and then every time you go up a floor, it's like, oh, level 1, level 2, level 3. And so you know you got it right if you go to the next level, and you got it wrong if you get kicked back to the start. I really didn't like that. Thinking back on it now, that probably would have been a better way to save time. The moment, I was like, oh, just trying to rush through it. And so I was like, I need a scoreboard, because you got to have like 3 mistakes. Like you get two mistakes that are freebies, and then the third mistake kicks you back to the start. So that way you get like a learning curve where you're not just constantly restarting. I still think that's a much better gameplay experience, where you get it wrong, and you're like, oh, shit, I'm trying to figure this out, but I can't quite like nail it down. In any case, my game design decision aside, I decided there you get 3 tries before you're back to the start. So I went into Sprite, the same thing I was doing with all the rest of the like UI interaction components of the main hub world, and used the same scoreboard thing that I made earlier and built this little score chambers. And then I drew an X and drew a green check mark. And then I made it so that, oh, if you get it right, it tells it to draw a check mark on the level you just beat. And if you get it wrong, it draws an X on the level you just left. And I was getting that set up. I had it calling in. It was like good to go. I had almost finished, and it ticked to 10 o'clock. That's 4 hours, man. I didn't do it. Like I said, this is a story of failure. very close. I have the core gameplay loop basically ready to go, and I have the player movement, I have the camera, I have the boundary system set up, I have the first hub world ready to go. I have some different nodes set up in that like first level, the first stage, but not enough for it to be like really that fun gameplay wise. And I need to set up the second stage, I need to set up the third stage, and then I need difference nodes in those stages as well, and then sound and music and the tutorial. So honestly, I wasn't even that close. It wasn't like, oh, if I had, 30 more minutes, I could have finished it. No, I probably would have needed like another 4 hours or something, at least another 4 hours probably. If only I could just like turn back time. If only I could just give myself more hours to work on the project. But unfortunately, that's not how life works, huh? Or maybe I can give myself more time. Because, like I said at the beginning of the video, the timer in the bottom of my screen that you've been seeing this whole time is not accurate. I set my clock to 4 hours before the end of the jam, but it's not actually 10 a.m. on August 20th, it's actually 10 p.m. on August 16th. And that's because I am a little trickster. No, that's because I wanted to have an easy way to count down what I was doing during my 4 hours easily. And I thought, oh, if I set it to 4 hours before the jam ends, it'll be very easy for me to look at the footage and know how long I spent up till this point, right? Because I just screen recorded my whole process of making the game. I thought that would be a really good way to keep track of it. And I didn't anticipate that I would need so much more time to complete the jam. I can simply set my clock back to August 16th, 10 p.m. and get back to work. I can give myself another 4 hours to actually get this done. So I didn't lie to you. This was a failure. I actually did want to finish this in 4 hours, just as like a personal pride thing to prove to myself that I can properly time box a game and get it done. But it's not what happened. However, we have a core gameplay loop, we have the hub world, and we have the first stage set up. So I think with another 4 hours of focused work, I can actually get a fun little game ready to go. And so that's what I did. I immediately finished the core gameplay loop that I had mentioned. It took like another 10 minutes to get the scoreboard up and functioning and have it so that essentially you can play through the game. Now, there's only difference nodes in that first stage, and there's only a couple of difference nodes in that first stage, so the game is not really very fun at this point, but it's functional. You can play it from start to finish. I got to work. I added a bunch more difference nodes to the library, and honestly, I got it to a point where it was pretty fun to play that core gameplay loop, where it's like going in and trying to spot the things that are wrong, and then when the things are obviously wrong, it's like actually very funny. I wasn't trying to make a comedy game, but when you go in and the little knight sprite is flipped upside down in pink, it's like, well, I guess that's one difference, right? But yeah, I spent like another 20 minutes getting the library differences set up, and then I started implementing the next two stages. I spent like the next 2 hours pulling in the art, getting the stage set up, adding a bunch of difference nodes, pulling in the art for the next one, getting the stage set up, adding a bunch of difference nodes, and it was just like pure create the content that is the gameplay of the game, because I had already built the systems underneath it that support it. And so that took like another 2.5 hours. And so I still had plenty of time in my 4 hours to make a tutorial. Now, when I was having my panic, I wasn't lying to you. I did decide I was just going to put like a little blurb of tutorial on the about page in the description because I didn't have time to implement it. But if I'm giving myself more time to do it anyway, might as well make a tutorial that's actually in the game, right? So I built a little tutorial where the guy talks to you and tells you how the game works. And I made it like conversational. And I think it's better than just the blurb of text. I feel like it really like gets you into, it sells the illusion of what the game is supposed to be better than a blurb of text would. And then I made a title screen that's just letters on a gray background because I hate making title screens. It's like my least favorite part of game jams. So I absolutely phoned in the title screen. And then after I did that stuff, it was just like the polishing bits where I added some background music and then a couple core sound effects that I thought were important. I fine-tuned the difference nodes a little bit, or I fine-tuned the calculation for how many difference nodes to put in a stage, because it was like the first couple stages were all like 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 0, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3 were your choices. And I find it more fun to see a lot of differences and like count them up. That was the thing that was more appealing to me. But I do have to say that this game is literally impossible for me to playtest. I am like the most biased possible playtester for this because I hand placed all the potential differences. I know exactly what to look for. And even I was having fun trying to spot it, but I have no idea what the onboarding experience is for a new player who doesn't know what the rooms are supposed to look like. If you spend a lot of time studying them on the like model part of the level, then maybe it can work. But in any case, I thought it was more fun when things change more, so I like fine-tuned that. And then I went and added some global difference nodes where it's like all the other difference nodes were local to their stage, right? Where I'm like, oh, this monster can appear in this stage or it cannot, or this monster is supposed to be here and it can be big or it can be flipped, or you know, this candle is supposed to be there. They're all local to their stage. But I had this little mage girl in the library And then I thought it would be funny if she could also show up in the Sonic stage. And so then I also made it so she could show up in the Ice Cavern. And with all of those, I was like, oh, it would be best if she could only show up in one of them. So there is like one mage girl that's like messing with you, right? So I made several different global difference nodes that can show up in any of the stages, but only the one of them can show up. And that was completely unnecessary, but I started having a lot of fun, like actually making the content of the game. So I went a little bit nuts with it, especially since I was so ahead of schedule, right? It's like, even as I'm recording this right now to the camera, it's midnight on August 17th, right? It just clicked over to August 18th. So I'm not even close to out of time. I could spend way more time on this if I wanted to, but the point of this was to time box it and get it done. And I got it done in my 8-hour window instead of 4 hours. So I'll consider that a win. Back to what I was talking about. All that was left was making the like you win page, right? Which normally in game jams is the very last thing I think about, as is in this case as well. I've got nothing else left to do. I'm running out of time, and I quickly slap in just like a blank canvas and put like you win in like black text. And if you get to the win screen, it immediately pops it up and you can't do anything other than like refresh the page, right? But I had extra time. I wasn't on a time crunch. So I thought, what if instead of just like you win, you can go into endless mode where you can just keep playing until you make a mistake, right? So if you make it through the 10, then you've won the game, and then you can just play in endless mode, right? That's normally something that I think, oh, I could totally add an endless mode to this once you beat the game. I think that for game jams all the time, never have time to add it. But in this case, why not, right? I have the extra time, right? I have like another hour of my 8 hours. So I added in this endless mode, and it's mad buggy. Like there were so many problems with endless mode because I made the tutorial like foreman guy come back and tell you, hey, good job, you won. Now you can play in endless mode. See you later. But trying to re-pop into the tutorial with new text when the tutorial was like super ham-fisted and clunkily coded in the first place was just tough. It was just not. But anyway, I fixed a bunch of bugs with it, got endless mode working, and then the game was done. Honestly, the majority of the time that went past the 4 hours was just adding content, adding the stages, adding the art for it, adding the difference nodes. It was just the gameplay. I spent 4 hours crafting out the core system and then gave myself another 4 hours to like put all the like polishing details and put all the things where I needed them to be and build the content of the game. And I think that might be an approach I take in future game jams as well, where I dedicate half of the time that I want to spend to it on like the systems, getting it so the game works, and then the other half on building the content. Because I feel like a lot of times I end up still trying to get the basic systems working at the last minute, like I did with my original 4-hour window on this. So let me show you in Engine. Here is, I forgot to record when I was adding some of the last bit of content. I recorded almost everything I did, but let me just like do a quick little tour, and you can see in Engine, this is what like the different worlds look like, because all of the difference nodes are just showing, because the way I wrote the difference nodes, it cleans everything up like really nicely when the game starts, and then it's very thorough with turning stuff on and off based on whether the difference is active or not, so I don't have to worry about it in editor. So the nodes are just a mess. Some of the stuff is in like its different state, some of it's not in its different state, and the stage is just like completely cluttered with stuff, which you juxtapose what it looks like in Engine right here with what it looks like on the model floor and what it's supposed to look like. You can tell it's like a complete mess. When you get to the higher levels of gameplay with a lot more differences, you get to see a lot more of this stuff like going nuts, and I think that's pretty fun. If you want to go experience that, I'll put a link to the game at the top of the description, maybe underneath my link to wishlist Isadora's Edge, which if you didn't do that and you watched all the way to this point in the video, if you could do me a huge favor and go wishlist my game on Steam, that'd be great. Also, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Blah, 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 blah. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you enjoy the game. It was another great GMTK game jam. I love doing the GMTK game jam, and it's really nice to increase the amount of time that we have available. I know that I completely squandered it with this weird thing I did with giving myself 4 hours, but I think it's a lot better. Even if you only want to spend the regular 48 hours, just having more time to eat and sleep and like be a human is fantastic. So shout out to GMTK. Thanks for hosting the game jam. Thanks for the changes you made to it. And thanks to everyone who's watching. I appreciate everyone. Love you all. Bye-bye. See you later, my little babies.